Welcome back. I hope everyone had a nice coffee break. And this will be now our last session of the joint conference looking ahead for projects shining a light for the path forward on energy transitions. So I won't moderate this last session. I would love to, but we decided not to. And I only will briefly present our moderator because we're very honored to have him with us. And I'm talking about Benjamin Sovacool. He is a professor of energy and policy at the University of Sussex, professor of Earth and Environment at Boston University, as well as professor of business and social sciences at the University of Aarhus. So I think there's probably hardly anyone better placed to shed light on looking ahead on science and innovation actions within a European research context. And with that, I'll simply pass over and thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much, Nicholas. And I will say for the record that the beer in Belgium is much better than the beer at Sussex or in Denmark, but I should probably watch that. It's a real pleasure to be here with our 4 sister projects. And as you've probably learned so far, right, these projects have spent millions of euros and hundreds of person months of time with so many work packages and outputs. And so such complex projects. And I think what we're going to really try to get into with this final session are some of the legacies of the projects, as well as maybe some of the challenges and kind of areas for future research. So let's get into it. So turning to this wonderful panel, and you can go first by, I guess, raising your hand. What is the legacy from each of your projects so far? Who wants to go first? I think Karoline will.
Yeah. Well, hello, welcome back, everyone. I'm coordinating, for the next 1 month, SONNET still, and I'd like to share 3 legacies. Obviously, there's much more. We have done so much, but I just want to highlight 3 things. The first thing is, you may have guessed it, about the diversity of social innovation. And I think there needs to be more research on that, both in terms of understanding the enabling and impeding conditions in the different types, also of newly emerging social innovations in energy, but then also in terms of how to tailor policies to these specific types to support them, particularly those that have been identified as having a great potential. That point, I think that's actually not only relevant for energy, but the typology that we developed in SONNET, I think it can also be passed on and applied within other sectors or other systems that also need to go undergo a transformation. So just think about mobility system. If you think about doing, thinking, organizing, and the different type of social relations, that structure the diversity of what's out there in the system, and then put the different types that you find in this system or in an agri-food system, I think that can help policymakers, but also practitioners and researchers to better understand and grapple with the complexity by sorting it into this typology. So that's the first legacy, and we're happy to pass this on to others, the future projects, but also the ones that will be on the stage in a little bit, but also any other projects. The second one is about what Julia already mentioned earlier about policy mix. So we really like to pass on this policy mix thinking applied to social innovation as a legacy for future research and policy making. And the point I want to stress here is that while we at the moment talking about social innovation experimenting more from an innovation policy perspective, so where policymakers from research and innovation really are aware of the importance of this, what we found is not that clear yet is how to further upscale it and diffuse it, so for really make the transformations happen. And for that, these insights, the knowledge about social innovation needs to be passed on to the sectoral policy field, so in energy to energy policy and climate policy, obviously, but also if you think about other domains also there. So that's really important, and there needs to be more engagement, and hopefully the future projects will pick this up. And the third point I'd like to pass on as a legacy is SONNET has been a transdisciplinary project. We've been collaborating with city partners to do this together. And for social innovation, obviously that's really important. And we also learned today in the discussions how important the local level is. So that's also something to pick up and continue in future work. What has been obviously quite challenging and is for this kind of research is like 3 years, it's quite limiting. You don't have that much time to engage deeply in experimenting. So that's perhaps something also to think about, to extend the duration of these kind of transdisciplinary co-creative projects. And things that could be done together is, for example, to look into creating future visions of how the system should look like if you think about these different types of social innovations and combined with technological innovations. But then also to include them in modeling studies, for example, to also mainstream this kind of thinking into the classical research on energy system transformation, and thereby to tap more into bringing that to the field that I mentioned, energy policy, climate policy, so the sectoral fields. So these 3 legacies: diversity, policy mix, and transdisciplinarity.
That's it? All right, what about your legacy?
Yes, I'm Silvia Caneva, I'm the coordinator of SocialRES. Yes, first of all, I would like to say that I really like the gender balance of this panel discussion, and this is my first message. So, thanks. We have seen that it's very important to have more women involved in the energy transition. And this is the first example that I would like to see, because we are really it's a practical example. So we are 4 women here in this panel discussion. I really would like to see this also in the future project, in the future when we are talking about energy. Then, second point, in SocialRES, we have investigated how different kind of social innovation can collaborate together. And so once again, a cooperative energy community, crowdfunding and aggregation, so energy trading, virtual power plant. And the example is like today. So today is an online hybrid conference, so we have some person from home following this conference, and then we have some person here today. So in the future, I would like to see citizens, European citizens, that they can decide. And so I had, in the diversity that you say just now, they can decide either they can be member of cooperative energy community, so like today, that we are here in presence, or they can be virtually involved in the energy transition with crowdfunding, peer-to-peer energy trading. So the third message is that we are not dreaming here today. So we are not in a conference. It will be nice if in 10 years the solution already exists. In these 2 days, we have seen how many case studies we have in this 4 project. So now is really, we have to spread the word, take action. For instance, since when I'm the coordinator of SocialRES, I myself wanted to give the example. I invested in crowdfunding project. I'm a member of Energy Cooperative. Now at home, in the house of my parents, we are trying to see if it's possible to use retrofitting. There are some Italian financing possibilities, name Ecobonus. So I give the message to take action. So this is a call for action for all of you here, because we can change the world by giving the example. So if we are the example, the people will follow us. But then we have really to spread the word in this way. These are my 3 main messages for SocialRES.
Yeah, then I will follow up from the NEWCOMERS project. My name is Julia Blasch. I'm the co-coordinator of the project. And yeah, I can maybe also mention 3 points that I see as a legacy of the NEWCOMERS project. First of all, our aim was, of course, to do interesting research and to come up with interesting policy recommendations, but we also wanted to create something for the people, for the European citizens. So we created several tools and materials for people to get inspired, and also informed about opportunities to engage in energy communities. So what I want to mention here is the ourenergy.eu platform, an awareness raising and inspiring platform where we posted short interactive presentations with information how to engage in energy communities, examples of well-functioning energy communities. So I think this is also very important, that these kind of projects also leave something for the people to take action. And we also created an energy literacy for energy communities handbook, in which we provide basic energy related knowledge that is specifically tailored to energy communities. So we hope that with these products and tools we can also support citizens on their journey to start or join an energy community. And at the same time I also see an opportunity here, because I think this week, Tuesday, there was an online event organized by another project working in the domain of energy communities. And they brought together several projects, all EU-funded projects working on energy communities, to share the tools and platforms and all the materials that are out there to support citizens. And it was great to see that there is so much, but I think there's also an opportunity to maybe in a future project or a future effort to also condense that a bit, because there's so much around, but it's a bit scattered. And I think for European citizens, it's maybe not necessarily easy to discover all these resources that are out there. So I think that that's something for the future to kind of synthesize here a bit and have like a one-stop shop where the citizens know if I go here, I get the information that I need. Then research-wise, I would say maybe one of our main legacies is that, we opened again a bit the discussion on what defines an energy community. So in our project, we explicitly opened the definition of what is a community a bit more compared to definitions that are out there in the literature. So we explicitly said we also consider virtual energy communities that are not place-based. We also explicitly said we also consider communities that involve commercial partners, so that are not necessarily started or initiated by citizens. Also to explore, how wide we can stretch this concept of community. And I think we had some interesting insights there that indeed community can also happen if it's not initiated by citizens or if people are not physically connected. I think we just started with this, exploring this part of energy communities, so that could also be something for a future project to explore further. And as a third legacy, I think that's something that we all did together, creating this joint policy brief or having this joint event. I think it was something that was quite new also to the European Commission, to CINEA, our funding body, and they seemed very pleased that we made this extra effort. So I think we all agree that we all profited enormously from the exchange. And maybe that is also something that we leave as an example for future EU-funded projects, that they take this extra step to connect and share the findings and produce then these synthesized policy briefs I think the policymakers, they really appreciate this extra effort that we made. So that's maybe our joint legacy.
Thank you very much. All right, and last but not least, I think Chiara is going to represent the final project.
Thank you. So I'm here representing COMETS. I'm not sure I have 3 prepared points, but COMETS is a project that has been focusing mainly on, collective action initiatives. And within that, the majority of those are energy communities, so I can speak about that we can say that we represented that sector in particular. The general aim of COMETS has been, and is for the first legacy of COMETS, it has been definitely providing more evidence and more understanding of energy communities across Europe, defining them, characterizing them, and probably the first outcome of that work is the evidence of a very heterogeneous sector. So as Julia said, you can have multiple different type of configurations of energy communities, and there are different actors involved. They can be bottom-up, top-down, and a lot of discussion could still go around in defining them and understanding what's their impact, both in terms of actions in the energy transition, but also in terms of social, environmental impacts. And that's probably the second legacy. So I think for the future it would be very important to provide to work on indicators, both quantitative and qualitative indicators, of the performance of energy communities along different dimensions. I'm talking about economics dimension, but also social and environmental dimension. Why? Because, as we said, they're very heterogeneous, they come from different perspectives, and for the policymakers, it's quite important to quantify, to have evidence of impacts in order to be able then to make a more evidence-based policy making on that. And that relates to the another point on legacy and future work on research on that, on energy communities. COMETS started before the implementation of the directives. So we started with a definition and understanding and history of energy communities, which is, let's say, in some way different from the definition, the formal definition and the formal configurations that are now starting in the sector of RECs. And I think there is quite a lot of work that could be done in understanding what's the difference between the previous energy communities, which are, as we said, very heterogeneous and characterized by mainly citizens' participation from bottom-up participation, and RECs. RECs, and with that I finish. I think RECs in the directive, I like to say that there is a dual purpose. So RECs, they are defined for two reasons. Well, they are legally defined in order to, first of all, let's say what I call an energy purpose, so to optimize the integration of distributed generation into the grid by allowing an increase of self-consumption, a local self-consumption. And that has got a very technical purpose, so reducing the amount of electricity that you export to the grid. And there is another purpose, which I think comes from the legacy of the history of energy communities, which is let's say, the more social and environmental purpose. In fact, they are defined as institutions that need to provide impacts, positive impacts in terms of environmental, social, and participation. And this dual purpose creates a bit of complexity in the implementation of RECs. And because the first purpose could be done with an energy community, which could be also an industrial energy community. So you don't need the participation of citizens necessarily to answer to the first purpose. But the second purpose requires participation of citizens. And I think further evidence and understanding of impacts of those initiatives would allow us to better understand how to target policy support. And because, for example, and that's with this I finish, the implementation, for example, in Italy of the directive in terms of policy support answered only to the first purpose. So the incentive is given for the electricity that is contextually self-consumed. So they're self-consumed at the moment of production. So that means that RECs earn from policy instruments, there is an incentive to self-consumption, whereas building up an energy community from a bottom-up energy community requires a lot of effort. So if you really want to make them work, you might want to think about policy incentives that goes in the direction of facilitating or funding feasibility studies and other type of policy instruments if you want to, are needed if you want to answer to the other purpose, which is the more social-oriented purpose. So this is what I would say. Well, in terms of outcomes, COMETS has produced a very, well, it's going to be published in a few weeks, a wide inventory of energy community, well, of collective action initiatives across Europe with a lot of data, and it's going to be publicly available, and that will definitely be available for every researcher that wants to do more quantitative analysis of those initiatives. And we also produce a lot of qualitative work and analysis of energy communities and collective action initiatives across Europe. So it's going to be all available on the COMETS website. So thanks everyone.
All right, so now we get into some of the more difficult questions, and I think we can go back around, starting with Chiara. So one of the things that I like most about social science research is you don't always know your findings until you start the study, right? We try not to do predetermined findings because that's kind of biased. And it also sets apart a lot of these projects because they're using mixed methods, which have very strong degrees of triangulation. So I'm interested now in surprises. And so can each of you tell me what was the biggest surprising or unexpected finding from your projects so far?
Wow.
And only one, the most important or the most surprising.
Well, I'm not sure what I'm saying represents the whole project, but I can. A surprise or something that probably will need to be further checked and researched is what I said also before, so the actual impact of those initiatives. So we start, we that work in the field, we are all motivated people, and we also start from the point of view that the assumption that those initiatives will deliver social impacts, positive social impacts, positive environmental impacts. They will bring in inclusion, social inclusions. And the reality is that that is not always the case for many reasons. Even the intentions are good, but the reality is that it's not always the case. It's not always the case in the same way for each experience. So, yeah, so it's a bit of a surprise on one hand, but it's also a realization of something that should be explored a bit more in the future.
All right, Julia, I think you can go next.
Yeah, so it's one surprise. I also can't necessarily say it's the only biggest surprise or so, but which is in principle good news. Some finding from our survey. It was probably already discussed here yesterday. That those people that are aware of energy communities, they also perceive them as highly important for the energy transitions in Europe. So that, is just another kind of support for policymakers, I think, to take action in creating, more opportunities for social innovation, for energy communities, because, people want to take that up and see the importance of that. So I think that is definitely one good news, or one surprising good news that came out from the survey research that we did, which was from representative samples, so it was not people particularly interested in social innovation or energy communities.
Silvia, you're on
difficult
deck.
question, indeed, because we have 8 case studies in SocialRES, but I will choose one. So in SocialRES, during SocialRES, the crowdfunding company Abundance, they have created a climate bond, collaborating with several municipalities in the UK. What was very surprising is that the citizens that they have invested in this climate bond, in crowdfunding you have a return on investment, they have decided to not take the return on investment and to give it to the municipality to invest in other projects. So they have decided, okay, I don't want to have a financial return on investment for crowdfunding. We want to give our money back to the municipality because we really want to have other projects financed in renewable energies, retrofitting, energy efficiencies. And also the crowdfunding company was very surprised, Abundance, because usually you invest in crowdfunding because instead of leaving your money in the bank, you invest, in crowdfunding, could be another example. And this was a very, very positive example. Only the 60% of citizens are aware of social innovation, as we have seen in our surveys. And so the question is really that I repeat myself, to spread the word. The example already here, the tools are already here. We are not dreaming here today in this conference. It's not a conference. It would be nice if everything is already here, and then this is my message, to spread the word because of the urgency that we see for mitigation of climate, global warming, to provide energy dependencies is very important. So this is my message from SocialRES.
Karolina, who's had the most chance to think.
Yes, so and I also don't need to re-mention necessarily 90% because that could be easily like the biggest surprise, like the up to 90% of citizens who would be interested in getting engaged in social innovation and energy, which is a massive number that can be tapped into. But I'm not going to use that one because I shared that already yesterday. I want to share our joint process of arriving from, well, do we study initiatives or fields? Because that was in the first year something that we debated, where we felt like, okay, to study the enabling and impeding conditions in social innovation and energy, is it enough to look at initiatives? So, you know, your energy cooperative in city A, B, C, and look at them. And we decided through workshops still face-to-face before the pandemic, that we actually would need to look into the field. So in innovation systems thinking, you could also think like an ecosystem or innovation system, but we applied this field logic to really see how actors together from different initiatives, through intermediaries, through associations, then work and do institutional work to change the rules of the game, basically, and how that happens and how that happened over time. And that has been really shaping our findings and enabling our findings. So I think this decision, yes, we need to look at social innovation fields, was like the key, one of the key things, but like a major decision. I wouldn't call it surprise, but like something that we decided in the research process would be the right angle to look at to investigate these impeding and enabling conditions.
All right, thank you. And it was a surprising question about surprises, so I think you all did a very good job. The next question is a bit of a compliment and then a question, and it's, you know, all four of these projects are actually excellent projects, and I mean that, and they're excellent, I think, in a few ways. One way is, of course, these are competitive projects, so we all had to go through the peer review process of the European Commission. I've seen the proposals for SONNET. It was hundreds of pages when you account for letters of support and CVs. And it's peer reviewed, and they only fund the best, right? You have to get extremely good scores through this competitive system. And all of the projects are also excellent in just the sheer number of work packages and partners, and I think all of them are operating in this space of transdisciplinarity, which is also rare. We did a content analysis that's a little out of date about 5 years ago and found that less than 1% of projects are transdisciplinary, right? So like these are all in that 1%. So tell me, from a project management perspective, right, because you're at this cutting edge, excellent research, well-funded, transdisciplinary, what's been the biggest problem you've had to overcome as coordinators within each of the projects? And I guess we can start again with Karoline and go all the way to give Chiara some time to think about it. Karoline.
I would say the pandemic, because it was unexpected. So you do all the risk management, right? Kind of risks, and you know what to do, and then a pandemic happened and a lockdown, and we wanted to do city labs with experimentation, you know, with engagement with citizens and try out new forms of engagement. We hadn't thought, obviously, that would be maybe digital engagement, but so we had to be very creative and had lots of emergency meetings. But I think what we did then do is to decide to take it experimental, make the best out of it, use it as find solutions to problems we didn't know would exist. And the team really got together there, and I'm really happy how it played out. But it was definitely the biggest challenge because we were unprepared for that. I learned a lot along the way.
I would say also the pandemic, because but I'm thinking also other projects I ever coordinated before the pandemic. Usually, what is the most difficult things that I have in a project is to put in practice what we do in the research field. Sometimes already we are talking a lot for a lot of years with the partners, but I have seen that in SocialRES is really a practical project, and so we have really case studies, and so in this case also for motivating the partners because they have to write a lot of deliverables, so the bureaucracy sometimes is quite high. But in SocialRES was really I would say, relatively easy to show that we have an impact. Yes, the impact to show the partners, the impact that we have working the 8 hours per day with our project. It's very important that also the partners has the feeling that they are giving a contribution. This is also I'm thinking not only about SocialRES but other projects. It's very important to show the partners that what we do 8 hours per day provide an impact, in this case to European citizens. With SocialRES, we have seen it. In front of me, there is the deputy director of one cooperative, several cooperatives in Germany. And so I'm sure that we are able in SocialRES with the case studies to see the impact, but in general, in European project, it's very difficult to see the impact of our research activities. This is my idea to motivate, therefore, the partners working the project.
Julia.
Yeah, I'm a bit boring. I mentioned also the pandemic as the biggest challenge. And yeah, I think, as you said, we also had a transdisciplinary approach. We worked with energy communities as case studies. And we also had this vision that there could also be, or there should be learning among the case studies, among each other. And I think this was a bit limited by the pandemic. We had the plan to organize an international workshop for the case studies where they meet and interact. And we had such a workshop, but it was online. And then, you're of course a bit limited. You cannot do the whole day, you do just 2-3 hours. And people meet in these virtual Zoom rooms. And I think that was to our disadvantage, that we could not create this interaction as much as we wanted it. And the same also then for the co-creation processes. Towards the end of the project, we wanted to involve our communities and the wider stakeholders of energy communities to co-create our policy recommendations, which we also did, but also in online workshops. And you can imagine that such a co-creation process is much more difficult to do if people are not in one room and not sitting around the same table. So that was a particular challenge due to a particular situation that we have not foreseen, as Karoline also said. So I would say that was the biggest challenge, to make it happen as we had planned it, this interaction and really with the societal partners.
Right, I'm not a coordinator of COMETS, but which is University of Torino, but I could see what happened. So I'm the last one. I have to say the pandemic was definitely an issue. And similar to what Julia said, COMETS had, some of the tasks of COMETS implied a lot of work with the energy communities, with the people. So the fact that it wasn't possible to do it in person, of course, was in some way a limit. One thing that I could add is working with energy communities, also what I realized is that they tend to be happy to engage because, of course, they like to provide evidence on what they do, but there are often realities that they are under-resourced, so they don't have so much time. Well, there is a bit of trade-off between their willingness to participate and their time that they're able to dedicate to research projects. Also because it's an increasing, interesting, the interest in the topic is increasing, so they receive a lot of requests of collaboration, and that sometimes limits a bit the activity of this type of projects and COMETS. Being able to do things online in some respects might have helped, because it requires a bit less of movement and traveling. Sometimes they're under-resourced also in terms of financial resources, so they cannot travel. So in one respect, the fact that we could do things online could have helped.
Well, it's quite amazing that all 4 projects still had such rich results, given you operated in the pandemic and had to curtail and constrain a lot of the original plans. So I guess they're also a testament to adaptive risk management, all of you, because none of you gave the money back, right? None of you canceled the projects. And you still did the power labs and the city labs, and you still were able.
And we're finishing in time, so it's a testament to all the people working on the project, so yeah.
Okay, my next question, we have time for a little bit more, is about generalizability. So As Nicholas was saying, I have 3 affiliations in different parts of the world, and each of those places has very different cultures, right? Denmark's in the Nordic space, which has very high taxes, social democratic institutions that really take climate change seriously. I'm also in the UK, which just Brexited disastrously. And then I'm also in the United States, which has a very different culture in terms of climate change beliefs and all of that. Tell me about your findings and whether you think they can apply to places like, well, I know Bristol, but Bristol isn't London, nor is it Brighton. Can they apply to carbon-intensive regions of Europe? Poland, Estonia. Can they apply to China? Can they apply to the United States? Can they apply to Iceland? Tell me about which of your findings you think really resonate globally and others which may have more limited generalizability. And we don't have to go around here. You can just raise your hand. Karoline.
Yeah, well, I would say they particularly resonate for Europe, since we had covered a number of different member states and also cities, for example, both from carbon-intensive regions and not. So there would be examples for others who are in the same category to look then more at a comparable city. But I wouldn't go so far to say, well, okay, now a city in China to look at the exact findings, but perhaps researchers there to look at the methods that we used and apply them, adjusting questionnaires obviously a bit, but still in principle to do that. And also recommendations in terms of research process for the city labs. I think it can be, if adjusted to the context, at least like inspire or stimulate to then be applied, say in the US, for example. But I wouldn't like copy it one-to-one.
Chiara, go ahead.
Well, I think COMETS, as I said, the main aim of COMETS was to provide evidence and understanding of the heterogeneity of the initiative. So probably one of the outcomes is really that you need to account for the context. In COMETS, we had 6 European countries, and there were 2 from the, let's say, North Europe, 2 from South, and 2 from the East. And that was useful because you could see the differences in the, let's say, I wouldn't say the level of development, but they were at different stages of the development of the sector. And that's probably one of the results. So it's not about being able to adapt, to transfer what we learn in one country to the other, but really saying, okay, we are at the different stages. And also in terms of implementation, yeah, the context is very important. So for example, legal forms used in different countries for those initiatives are different. So in some, cooperatives are still the majority of the legal form used, but for example in Estonia, most of the initiatives, they were housing associations. So so COMETS had that aim really to provide more evidence on the variety. So I cannot say that we had results that can be easily applied to or transferred. Although in terms of methods, or at least in terms of takeaway for the future, we started doing a little bit of work on indicators, for example, of performance of initiatives. And that's, I think, it's a takeaway that can be applied to any context. So the fact that you need to, that it is important to try to quantify impacts in order to be able then to help and to help evidence-based policy or actions in favor of the sector. So that's what I would say.
Maybe I can follow up on this. Also from NEWCOMERS, a clear finding was that it's all context dependent, and indeed in every country you have a different regulatory environment, you have a different socio-cultural environment. For example, we discovered that trust plays an important role, how much trust is embedded in a society. So in that sense, it would have to be country and context specific. But I think the findings that we have more on people's motivations to participate in these types of initiatives, and also the values that they take out of being part of an energy community. I could imagine that this is something that is a bit more generalizable. So of course, you need the specific context for these initiatives to start, but when they start, I think motivations of people to join and then the benefits that they get out of these communities, I think that is more universal.
In SocialRES, the answer is yes, definitely. We have seen, for instance, one SocialRES case studies is we have created a peer-to-peer energy trading in Bucharest. Tracklabel was the partner involved, and now in SocialRES we are trying to see how other energy community of prosumers can also apply these case studies in other parts of Europe. I've mentioned before the climate band of abundance, where with crowdfunding the citizens can really contribute to the sustainable development of municipalities. This is another example. And then of course a cooperative energy community, they are more local, but of course this concept can be applied, I would say, everywhere. Maybe I'm a dreamer, but I definitely see that, of course, take into account the local legislation, the local needs of different parts of Europe, of the world. This business model can be applied everywhere.
All right, I think we have time for one more question with a very quick response. Now, I know that all 4 projects have sought impact, and we often tell our own research fellows when they're thinking of impact, think of the elevator pitch. Think if you had 1 minute with the German Chancellor, or the English Prime Minister, or the President of the European Commission, or the head of the COPS, right? What would you say is the most important policy finding and recommendation from each of your projects? If you could speak truth to power in 1 minute, what would you say?
If you want to be successful with the transformation, and that's the objective, then you need to also promote social innovation. It can't be solved just with technological innovation. You need to think social innovation alongside technological innovation. That means you need to promote this, you need to adjust your frameworks to that. And here is a policy brief that summarizes all the findings of 4 great projects.
How are you going to top that, Chiara?
Right, I'm gonna focus on energy communities in particular. So if you want to be serious about energy communities and citizen participation, you need to work on informing people. So you need to allow further information and communication of the value of these initiatives. And you need to find the right incentives, policy incentives to support them, because they need to be, they are like, as you support technology deployment, like as you did for photovoltaics and for wind, you need to do it also for this type of social innovations. There are projects that need to be supported. That's it.
And Chiara, if I guess just to build on that, you said policy support. Any particular mechanism? Feed-in tariff, cooperative tax credit, what mechanism? Carbon tax?
I would say in this phase, as I mentioned before, I would say grants. Grants, because they need to be, they are complex entities, especially if you want to get the right participation of citizens. So if you want to make them bottom up, and if you want to optimize the social impacts, then you need to make them very inclusive. And in order to do that, they need to be supported with policy with advice. So you need to fund advisory institutions or structures or networks and grants. So they need money to start.
I also need money for the record. Julia, do you want to go next?
Yeah, it also kind of matches what Chiara just said. So I would probably highlight that there are 2 things to do. One thing is to remove the current barriers that energy communities and social innovation initiatives face, because, yeah, there are currently many. And in addition, also, that matches with what you just said, after having removed the barriers, also to take kind of positive action or create policies that, yeah, create an advantage for energy communities and social innovation. So, yeah, for example, by financial incentives. So that was also mentioned several times yesterday, that these financial incentives are key to, yeah, encourage people to take the risk to set up a community or another social innovation initiative. So, yeah, that would be my key highlight, that there's these 2 steps to go, and that it's not enough to stop at removing the barriers, but to also actively support these initiatives.
Silvia, you get to go last. Look at that.
Once again, please, everything is written here. Anyhow, I would like to say social innovation are really the solution for mitigating global warming to further support energy independences, energy democracy. This is my key message. We don't have to invent anything new. Everything is already here. Everything is already ready. And then the policies or the political decisions should support what already exists, improving to remove barriers and so on, providing more grants, more funding, but it's already here. Everything is already here. We just need really to further improve it, inform as much citizens as possible, and spread the word and take action, of course.
So 4 actually very uplifting findings. Appreciate social innovation. Don't have to just tweak technologies and promote technical innovation. Make sure that you adequately create policy changes, like grants. Finance is a very important lever which can catalyze action, and we've got all the tools we need. We don't have to wait necessarily for new things to emerge. We can decarbonize now, which is very much in line with the IPCC, which says we've got to peak emissions by 2025, or we're not going to make it. And they're also projecting a 3.1 degree temperature change, right, is the most likely scenario now, which is not good for the environment. But there was also a piece published in Nature last week that says that a 2 degree world is still possible if we fully implement all policies. If, which we probably won't, but it's still possible. So thank you very much, I think, for a very illuminating discussion. We're going to take a short break. Is that right, Nicholas? What's that? Okay, and we're going to have Eoghan come on. Eoghan, welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a great pity that I can't be in Antwerp with you, so I hope I'm not too much of a Wizard of Oz floating head, but it's been great to listen to the first part of the discussion, and I'm keen to contribute.
Excellent, well, welcome, and we'll have a beer for you this afternoon, I think. And so I know that we're really interested in policy. We were just going around talking about policy. But one of the things we haven't talked so much about is politics, which are always lurking behind policy. And the past 3 years have been a shockwave of different political situations, from Brexit to the pandemic, which is certainly hitting national treasuries, to the current war, Russia's war with Ukraine. So can you tell us more, Eoghan, a bit about political agendas? What has changed in the past 3 years in terms of the politics and the political coalitions behind clean energy, all the way up to this week, I guess?
Yeah, as you said yourself, there's certainly been a huge amount of change over the last few years. It's kind of hard to fathom at times everything that has happened since 2019 and the new commission. But I'd actually start by touching on what you mentioned yourself there is the latest IPCC report. Because I think, again, this reinforces the need for urgent and sustained climate action. Greenhouse gas emissions have continued to rise to 2019, and even with slower growth over the past decade, which was shown, so that's some positive, I think it's a very small and swiftly closing window of opportunity we have to prevent global warming of greater than 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees even. And without immediate and deep emissions reductions across all sectors, we will fail, is essentially the message of the report. And I think that's why in 2019, the European Commission presented the European Green Deal. So I think the Green Deal is a roadmap for action, is a good way to describe it, because it doesn't try and set out every single action that needs to be taken, but rather across the main work streams and sectors, it shows how we could go about achieving climate neutrality in Europe by 2050. And that's coupled with a longer-term vision for a greener and a fairer and I think a more resilient society. And I think it is important. It's important to acknowledge that it's not just another climate policy, but it is a really historic step for the EU. For the first time, I think it's a policy shift where the focus is on a 30-year time horizon and not the usual 5-year political policy economic cycle. It's going to involve major changes across all the key sectors of our economy and society. So the climate, energy, industry and circular economy, mobility, the built environment, food systems and farming, biodiversity and pollution. And then, of course, you also have cross-cutting sectors such as finance and, of course, my own research and innovation. And then I think that's in December 2019. And then last year, building on this, you had the so-called Fit for 55 packages. So these are Commission proposals that aim to put the EU on the right path for 2030 and then by extension 2050. And the headline target of these is to have an at least 55% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 compared to 1990 levels. And then within this kind of interconnected set of proposals, there's other various targets. So it's 40% renewable energy by 2030, between 36 and 39% of energy efficiency by 2030, a 55% reduction of emissions from motor vehicles by 2030, and zero emissions from new cars by 2035. And for instance, something like building renovation, so 35 million buildings to be renovated in Europe by 2030. And then, of course, you had the pandemic within all of this, and we really see the European Green Deal as, one, the EU's new growth strategy, but then two, the kind of motor and compass to get us out of the pandemic and for the recovery, and a sustainable and resilient recovery. And then I think, you know, it's difficult to talk now about clean energy transition with the events of the past 2 months and the Russian invasion of Ukraine on the 24th of February, which has obviously resulted in major changes. And I don't want to minimize the tragedy of the war and its impact on Ukraine and the Ukrainian people. But these changes have also resulted in a renewed emphasis being placed on the clean energy transition as a means to overcome some of the challenges that the EU is now facing. You know, you're well aware that the production and use of energy account for more than 75% of the EU's greenhouse gas emissions. So it's the key pillar, I would say, of the Green Deal is the clean energy transition. This is how it's going to be achieved. And the current EU energy and electricity generation mixes are still overly reliant on fossil fuels, on coal, natural gas and oil, and then by extension, a dangerous overdependence on a single supplier, in this case, Russia. So there's now, alongside the climate and environmental and economic incentive, there's a major geopolitical incentive to rapidly reduce our dependence on Russian fossil fuels, which in turn is going to accelerate the clean energy transition. So these three factors, I think, the Green Deal, the pandemic, and the war, mean that there's now a more concerted EU-level push for affordable, secure, and sustainable energy. And some of you may have seen in March, we presented Repower EU, which is a plan that's to tackle the issue of energy security. And it includes various measures on price regulation, state aid, on gas storage, diversifying our gas supplies, on hydrogen production, biomass production, on accelerating the rollout of renewables infrastructure and permitting, and also accelerating the rollout for energy solutions, so solar panels, heat pumps, etc. And then I think within all of this, I work in DG Research and Innovation. So I'm somewhat biased, of course, but I think it's clear that in the Green Deal, research and innovation policy plays a major role in enabling the various transitions, including the clean energy one. And this is by developing, demonstrating, and deploying solutions, as the projects that are being discussed here today have shown. And I touch on what Silvia said as well. So for 2030, certainly we believe we have all the solutions that are needed to make the necessary emissions reductions. It's now a case of making them cost competitive, of deploying them more widely and at scale, and making them available to people. You know, there is a need for increased investment in research and innovation to achieve climate neutrality. This is why Horizon Europe is going to devote at least 35% of its 95.5 billion budget to climate action. So this is, you know, new research and innovation partnerships in areas like hydrogen, aviation, automotives, and steel. But then, as the projects have shown, and as they said here today, it's important to acknowledge that technology alone is not the answer. And it's why Horizon Europe is emphasizing societal challenges and multiple approaches, including societal innovation and social innovation. So this is particularly important for the green transition, and it's something that you'll hear the Executive Vice President, Frans Timmermans, is constantly saying, is the Green Deal will only be a success if it's a just and socially fair transition. And that's why through initiatives such as the Climate Pact and citizens' dialogues, we're making a major effort that people feel informed and represented and engaged with what is happening. And one research and innovation initiative I'd like to flag here is the EU missions. So these are a prime example, I think, of how research and innovation works to tackle the largest challenges, you know, whether it's on oceans, on climate adaptation, on climate neutral cities, cancer, you know, and soil, that we face on a global level these challenges, but with action starting at the local level, closely involving people on the ground. So I think that's, yeah, a quick overview, I hope, of the major political changes we've seen. But there's certainly a lot going on.
Owen, I do have a question. We've got a little bit of time. And so we've been following, of course, what we can do to get off of Russian gas. And the International Energy Agency even said a few months ago we could start using more coal, which is obviously something I don't support, but it does underscore the importance of energy security. And I was also last month visiting parts of the UK, like Hull, which is near the Humber, where they're even talking about repurposing gas fields. They've just closed down. They closed down and abandoned natural gas fields. Then I want to open them back up so they can have more storage, which has leakage and other climate effects. And so tell me more about what you think we can do to get off of Russian gas on the supply side, on the demand side. And do you support things like coal, or is there a way to do this without fossil fuels?
I think it's a very good question, and it's something that's you know, at the top of a lot of people's minds, both the political level within the Commission and the member states, but also, you know, everyday people who are wondering, how is it that you can all of a sudden try and replace all this Russian fossil fuels without then, is it whether it's reopening coal or gas fields, etc. And I think you referenced the IEA there, but I'd also say last week only, I think, on at least mid-April, the Commission and the International Energy Agency produced this report entitled Playing My Part. So it's part of this, it's a 10-point plan that has been endorsed by the Commission as well, which is to save money and reduce reliance on Russian fossil fuels, which then obviously in turn supports Ukraine and helps to fight climate change. And many of these are more basic measures. Obviously, everything is relative for people, but it's things like turning down the thermostat by 1 degree, can be working from home. So I'm doing my bit today. It can be taking public transport. And I think, you know, these kind of measures are also where people can feel more empowered, and it's not necessarily then as scary and as massive a problem for people when it can be broken down into these things that they have the power to do in their daily lives. And I think that, you know, when you listen to the projects and what they're saying, it's really about empowering people and involving them in the clean energy transition. And this also includes, you know, the more vulnerable people in society now for whom energy poverty was a big issue. And now with these increasing energy prices, they're even at more risk. So I think, you know, sometimes even within the research and innovation community, you get people who are, you know, full on for the technological solutions, and for whom maybe social innovation is a bit of a fuzzy term. But I think that these projects and others like them, they show the real benefit of trying to better understand people's decision making and coming up with practical and innovative recommendations. You know, as Silvia said it, and I said it earlier, we do have the solutions in place to reduce our emissions sufficiently by 2030. And then while more investment is needed, I think for 2030, with what we have and the results from Horizon 2020 and what will come out of Horizon Europe, we should be in a good position. So that would be a short answer to what is certainly a difficult question. But I don't think that the Commission sees neither the pandemic nor the Russian invasion of Ukraine as a reason to start ramping up investment in fossil fuels. That's certainly not the case. If anything, this shows the importance of further and quicker action for the European Green Deal. So that's what I'd like to emphasize.
Thank you, Eoghan. I have a final question. I think we have like 2 minutes left. And that's, obviously, Europe is great, and it's nice that Europe might actually make its net zero targets by 2030, but Europe is still Europe, right? The biggest emitter is China, the US is number 2, you've got countries, Russia, Indonesia, South Africa. They're all behind. So what is the Commission doing to help lead and kind of spread the word? Are you working with these other constituents, you know, and how do you go about working with them so it's not seen as colonialist and us telling them what to do? They need our help, but they might be so arrogant they don't know they need our help and they don't want to ask for it. So how are you working internationally to spread European leadership on climate?
So I think the easy answer would be to say that, you know, we started the Green Deal and acknowledge the fact that I think the EU is responsible for more or less 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions, give or take, and depending on how you measure it. So the main thing is to be an example to others. You know, there's no point the EU going around asking other countries, you know, to step up their efforts if we ourselves are not making the biggest effort. And there has to be a recognition as well, I think, of the historic emissions of countries in the EU, and that developing countries and countries in other parts of the world have not necessarily emitted as much, but are now being asked to reduce at the same speed. So I think the first thing is we have to lead by example. We have to be best in class. And then the other one, I think you'd see it, you mentioned the COPs earlier, but there's a huge level of international engagement where the EU and all the member states are very closely involved. And this extends to our partners, so that whether it's you know, the UK, Switzerland, the US, Norway, Turkey, all of these kind of countries where we work very closely on different issues on energy and climate. And then also countries, you know, such as China, India, where we're trying to work with them. We recognize that they are some of the largest emitters, but they have a different context, both currently and historically. So one, it's, you know, showing goodwill and sharing information and best practice, etc. And then two, I think it's concretely having different measures in place. So I know, for instance, one of the things that we work on closely in my area is the Mission Innovation, which is a global initiative for clean energy transition, where there's been over 4 billion invested in the past 5 years or so, with over 1,000 solutions created. And this is with 24 different countries, not including the EU, so that's another further 27. And I think that there is a great appetite out there for more international engagement on climate and on energy. And I thought your question, I'm conscious of the time, but on the generalizability of the social innovation projects is very important, because, you know, even in countries, maybe you mentioned the US as one where there's different kind of opinion, public opinion on climate change, and still higher levels of climate skepticism than in the EU. But I still think at the end of the day, most people want to feel as if they have a level of agency and empowerment in their daily lives, and then in what is being decided at the political level. So it's both the international engagement is all fine and well, but at the end of the day, there's 8 billion people on the planet that, for the vast majority of us, I have to believe, we have the same motivations, the same fears. You know, people want to be healthy, they want their children to be healthy and have a livable planet. So I think this is the core message, is it's not the EU alone that would benefit from a climate neutral world. This is the future for everyone.
Thank you very much, Eoghan. Very inspiring, and may I hope that maybe someday you are president of the European Commission, because I think that would be exactly the sort of stuff we need to see. So thank you. I think we're moving on to the next session now, but have a wonderful afternoon, and thanks for doing your part to work from home.
Thank you.
Right, so those of you that were watching closely may realize the people next to me have changed. These are not the same people who were here before. And so we're now moving into the final session where we're going to be looking ahead at the next generation of projects. And so I know the audience may not know everyone here, so let's go around and do a proper introduction. Just tell us who you are, where you're from, and what project you represent. And we'll start this way. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. I'm very happy to be here, and congratulations to all of you for this amazing 2 days conference. My name is Elisabeth Unterfrauner. I work for the Center for Social Innovation in Vienna, and we do coordinate EC², which is one of the 5 sister projects, actually. So I make it short here, but I want to thank you for the opportunity, and it has been very exciting and inspiring.
Give some applause for that, right? Come on. It's so rare, Elisabeth, that we get praise, so I think we're all welcome to take it.
Yeah, thank you. My name is BinBin Pearce. I'm the coordinator for ENCLUDE project, which is Energy Citizens for Inclusive Decarbonization. I'm based currently at TU Delft and had just recently moved there from ETH Zurich. And I have to say, there's been just so many insights that I've gathered from everyone's presentation so far. So I share Elisabeth's sort of perspective that it's really been hugely helpful for just already thinking about where we should go ahead from here. Thanks.
All right, Bonno, you're next.
Yeah, thank you. Bonno Pel, Université Libre de Bruxelles. For EnergyPROSPECTS project, I'm being coordinated by Francis Fahey from University of Galway, Ireland, who does this very well. And thank you for the diversity presented here and for not being a one-stop shop, because I would have left already.
Such honesty. And last but not least, Salla.
Hi, I'm Salla Annala. I'm from LUT University in Finland. We are coordinating the GRETA project. I'm not the coordinator. Professor Helena Melkas is the coordinator, but she was not able to join today.
So it's quite nice. We have, 4 projects kind of winding down, and 4 or 5 projects starting up. So I guess the question for you to consider, and we can go around again, what contribution do you hope to make to the current state of the art on energy policy, energy transition, social innovation, given it seems like most of the work's already been done? So we can start with you, Elisabeth.
Yeah, thank you. So we do hope that we will not reinvent the wheel, so there's much we can build upon, that we can draw from our, let's say, old sister projects. What we contribute is that we investigate energy citizenship as a core concept, and EC² stands for energy citizenship and energy communities, so also to understand the trajectories and the prerequisites for energy communities and for energy citizenship to thrive, to unfold. And we do investigate these concepts from 3 angles. So from psychology. Psychology has been mentioned a couple of times already as key discipline. And we also investigate from a legal perspective and from an economic perspective. And I think this is a great mixture, a great combination of disciplines. And we work interdisciplinarily and also transdisciplinarily. So in this first year, we are now in month 12 of the 3-year lasting project. We have had several co-creation workshops in different regions, so to bridge also the gap between research and practice. And we do have an excellent consortium of very different stakeholder groups. We have the research partners, we do have practice partners, we do have energy communities, and we do have municipalities on board and networks partners like ECLE and GEN with the eco-villages. And I think that's great. We also heard yesterday, and I also think that it's true that the municipalities, that the local governments are key. So I'm happy that we have those on board and hope to find out more in this 3-year project.
Excellent, Elisabeth. And I also appreciate the tripartite disciplinary focus. And we haven't seen a lot of psychology, or economics. So, BinBin.
Thank you, Ben. I think there are maybe 3 areas that we hope to make a contribution in. These really stem from the insights that I've found from the conference so far. One is this idea of diversity, that there's a diversity of social innovations. And I think what we hope to contribute is understanding that diversity from the energy citizenship perspective. And we want to do this by understanding what this concept means empirically, and from those who are traditionally marginalized and vulnerable and those who are not participants in the energy transition. So what does that look like? What does that idea look like from the other side? The second point is, we mentioned several times already this idea of that it's fully, the concept and the potential of social innovations is yet to be tapped. And so the question is, how do we tap it? And we do this from two perspectives. One is actually to be able to quantify the impact of energy citizenship in various decarbonization pathways and scenarios. So what does that actually mean for decision makers EU-wide when we do have various scenarios of energy citizenship being implemented on the ground? Secondly, I think this idea of tapping potential is also matching decision-making contexts to the decisions that have to be made. And the way that we would like to do this is developing the ENCLUDE interactive policy platform, in which we are trying to give local decision makers and cities an idea of, given various configurations of energy citizenship, what can they do with that? How can they actually mobilize the initiatives on the ground and people in their communities that to actually do something about decarbonization? I would say the third point in which we were trying to contribute is exactly what already Elisabeth has talked about in terms of co-creation. I mean, there's been a lot of talk about the promise of experimentation and the need for evaluation of co-creation activities, and that's also what we're trying to move towards with the ENCLUDE Academy, in which we're really trying to provide support for energy citizen leaders, in which we're trying to seed and catalyze local decarbonization activities already happening or about to happen on the ground. So exactly, a lot of the City Lab action that we've seen in SONNET, for example, we're trying to do that also for individual citizens, or we're trying to do this virtually. So already understanding that we're in this hybrid and virtual environment. How do we do that across the EU, online? And also, how do we build a peer-to-peer mutual learning network so that countries around within the EU can actually learn from each other in this community context? So I would say that those are the three things we hope to achieve. We have not yet achieved, but that's actually where we're targeting.
And BinBin, I'm just curious, you know, we often cite in some of our research that something like 72% of carbon emissions are under the control of consumers, right? Because industry is responding to our needs. So when you're talking about the possible contribution that citizens can play in decarbonization, are you thinking that they could be 20%, 50%? Like, I know you haven't done it yet, but what's your sense? Are we talking significant contributions or kind of 10% more at the margins?
I think this is exactly the question of how do we define the consumer? And are we talking about individuals or are we talking about collectives? And how do we define those entities? And I think that is actually the question in terms of our modeling that we're trying to get to the bottom of, is that depending on how you define these groups and defining the behaviors that define these groups, you get to various outcomes. And so I think that, like you say, we don't know yet, but I think we think that the potential of citizens is a lot bigger than what normally is discussed, because normally what we have in our minds about citizens is exactly sort of around the edges, energy consumption demand turning down, and various initiatives that we've talked about so far. But if we discuss energy citizenship and the idea of individual change in behavior as a collective movement, as a potential catalyst for social transformation as a whole, and some analogies that we've compared to is, for example, the American civil rights movement or the tobacco industry changes going on there in the US, that those individual seeds of change can actually lead to much wider sea changes. So I think that's what we're trying to capture and trying to see exactly what the range is in terms of potential.
Thank you. We'll have to follow that closely. I look forward to seeing the findings. Bonno, you've been very patient. Tell us about your project and what you do, what you hope to contribute.
My role in it, by the way, is to lead the conceptual framework development with some colleagues. Already in that little work package, there's already one important contribution that we hope to deliver, and I think we won't completely, because it is a huge task. There's a lot of things that we can talk about that have been changing in the world. the situation of achieving the climate targets, the situation of in the Ukraine. I think few people will not be aware of it, that it happens. What we hope to achieve, or what I personally very much would like to achieve, is just one thing, and that is to develop a more refined and realistic policy discourse. Because we, apart from these other things mentioned in the energy system, we also just had the elections in France, which were kind of dramatic. Tells you something, puts this 90% a bit in perspective. We have had elections in Hungary. We have had, well, in my own country, the Netherlands, also elections where things are happening that I did not believe were possible when I was an adolescent. And we live in a time that's when you open your LinkedIn and you get lost there, then you get into sequences like you post something on puts back your heating in your home from 28 to 23, or what was it again? Then you like some research project that says the same. Then you share some message from a research project who are citing the European Commission, who is basing that on apparently from evidence from science. And then there is some responses below. We should do more with energy citizenship. Yes, indeed. Actually, we can see energy citizenship is actually happening. And then response, we should have more energy citizenship. Then there's at the end of the project, there is some kind of shared policy brief where one of the main conclusions is we should be doing more about energy citizenship, whilst I think that about that energy citizenship, one of the first things that we have to ask ourselves, if you take a real transitions perspective, and the knowledge development and the policy discourse development is a dimension of transitions, why is it that after years of talking about acceptance of energy, participation in energy, energy democracy, energy justice, social innovation in energy, all these things, endless discussions about participatory democracy as well. Why is it in this particular stage of democracy, of the energy transition, why is it in this particular stage that this concept of energy citizenship comes up? And how should we deal with this as scientists? Because our projects, we are talking about empirical things, concrete energy citizens, like you're in the bus, like how many energy citizens would there be in this bus? But at the same time, it's an ideology and it is a discourse, and we need to keep these things together, and they tend to be very much blended nowadays. So I would already be very happy if we, on the conceptual level, advance and get us out of the loop in which policy and research are basically in some kind of echo chamber, which is very much polluting the data, is mixing up facts and visions and future and past and present, which is kind of an echo chamber that is very painful to have in this stage of transition. So just that one thing I would hope to achieve.
Thank you, Bonno. And I have a quick follow-up question. I get Elisabeth's project, EC2. I obviously get ENCLUDE. EnergyPROSPECTS. Why is it called this? Your microphone, sir.
Yeah. That's an interesting question. Because at a certain point, it was myself I came up with an acronym that I found much better. But in the end, I had to admit to my colleagues that this one was better, and actually we did get all of the points in the review. So I dropped my suggestions for that. I'm not good at that. Personally, I don't like the term so well. I like our projects, but the name, I don't find it so cool.
Well, I really appreciate your honesty. Now, Salla has a project called GRETA, which I think I can guess what it's about, but I'll let Salla speak about it and its contribution.
Yes, so GRETA comes from Green Energy transition actions, I believe, if I remember correctly. That was easier than my previous project. But yes, of course, we are also trying to understand the emergence of energy citizenship, which we understand in quite a wide way. So it can be investing in own generation or making maintenance investments in insulation or energy-efficient appliances, or also efficient mobility. So those are things that we are focusing on. We actually have the kickoff of the policy work package only in 2 weeks, so no policy comments that much yet at this point. But I also want to defend perhaps the view of engineers in this because of my background. So we are also, it's important to make the data that is available into something that people can actually use and that turns into information. So for example, the smart meter legislation, there was big expectations that that would lead to some changes in how people behave, but actually the data from smart meters, is it something that people can work with or change their behavior based on? So we are also considering this energy literacy and energy informatics things. And as another thing related to, if that's more towards the citizens, like how they use data and get information, we are also trying to provide information for example, local city planners. So we are considering energy modeling and how to put that on the map with geographical references and help the city planners consider which part of the city it's most efficient to make some changes which has biggest impacts. So those are also important aspects.
So one quick follow-up question, Salla, is Karoline knows at the University of Sussex, we have done work with Mauri Matroskanian on heat pumps in Finland, where you're a real leader for heat pump adoption. And our colleague Paula Kivimaa has done mobility as a service, where also Finland's very ahead. Are you studying either of those as well in GRETA?
I think in one of the case studies, heat pumps have been considered as one option to get away from use of natural gas for heating. So that is one option, but it's not yet defined whether that will be the final option. There are, of course, cost factors affecting, so it might be also something biomass-based heating or something else. Related to mobility, we are considering this autonomous vehicles and how to use them to get both safer transport and also more sustainable transport.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. I think we've run out of time, which means I have to call Nicholas back up here. But first, let's have a round of applause for these very exciting projects.